There are moments in the wilderness when enemies become family, when the laws of survival are rewritten by a single act of compassion that defies every instinct. In the remote forests of Yellowstone National Park, a trail camera captured something that wildlife researchers initially thought was impossible: a lone wolf standing guard over an abandoned grizzly bear cub, protecting it from the very pack that should have been her family, risking everything to save a creature that would one day become her greatest competitor. What started as an unexpected discovery became a bond that would challenge everything we understand about rivalry, loyalty, and the capacity for love between species that nature designed to be adversaries. This story will break your heart, rebuild it, and prove that sometimes the fiercest protector comes from the most unlikely place. Subscribe now, because what this wolf sacrificed for one abandoned cub will leave you sobbing and believing in the impossible. Dr. Elena Rivera had spent 15 years studying the Lamar Canyon wolf pack, one of Yellowstone's most documented and beloved packs. She knew every member, their personalities, their dynamics, their stories, but nothing in those 15 years prepared her for what Trail Camera 28 captured on a cold September morning. The footage showed a wolf Elena immediately recognized, a 4-year-old female the research team had named Shadow. Shadow was the pack's omega, the lowest-ranking member, constantly bullied by more dominant wolves, often forced to eat last, sometimes denied food entirely. She was thin, scarred, and had never been allowed to mate or raise pups despite being breeding age. In the footage, Shadow was alone, separated from her pack, moving through dense forest with the cautious gait of a wolf who'd learned to expect punishment. Then she stopped, her ears pricking forward, her body tensing. She'd heard something. Shadow approached a thick cluster of bushes carefully, sniffing, investigating. Then she pushed through the vegetation and froze completely at what she found: a grizzly bear cub. Impossibly small, maybe 6 weeks old, was huddled against a fallen log, making distressed crying sounds that echoed through the forest. The cub was alone, filthy, clearly hadn't eaten in days, and was dangerously hypothermic, based on its lethargic movements. Elena watched the footage with her heart pounding, knowing what should happen next. Wolves killed bear cubs when they found them alone. It was competition elimination. One less future rival for elk, for territory, for resources. Shadow should attack, or at minimum, howl to alert her pack to the vulnerable prey. Shadow did neither. She approached the cub slowly, sniffed it thoroughly, and the cub, too young and weak to recognize danger, made a sound that seemed to trigger something in Shadow. The baby bear was crying for its mother, a sound apparently universal enough that even a wolf recognized it as a call for help. Shadow looked around, clearly searching for the cub's mother. When no adult bear appeared, Shadow made a decision that Elena would watch dozens of times, still unable to fully process. Shadow lay down beside the shivering cub. She curved her body around the tiny bear, sharing her warmth, and began licking the cub gently. The same grooming behavior wolves used on their own pups. "No," Elena breathed at her computer screen. "Shadow, what are you doing?" But Shadow wasn't finished shocking her. The wolf stood, grabbed the cub carefully by the scruff, the way wolves carried pups, and began walking. Not toward her pack, but away from them, moving with clear purpose toward an area Elena recognized. Shadow was taking the cub to an abandoned den, a shelter, a place of safety. Shadow was rescuing this bear cub. Elena immediately pulled up incident reports and found what she'd feared. 4 days earlier, rangers had investigated a grizzly bear killed by a dominant male bear in a territorial dispute. The female had been nursing, but no cubs were found despite extensive searching. This tiny cub had somehow survived 4 days alone after watching its mother die. And now it was being carried to safety by a wolf, who should be its natural enemy. "I need the field team at Lamar Canyon immediately," Elena radioed. "We have a situation that's unprecedented. A wolf from the canyon pack is protecting an abandoned grizzly cub. I need eyes on this now." But even as Elena coordinated the response, she was reviewing Shadow's history, looking for any explanation for this behavior. What she found made her throat tighten with emotion. 2 years ago, Shadow had given birth to 3 pups, her only litter, achieved during a brief moment when pack hierarchy had been disrupted. The pack's alpha female, reasserting dominance, had killed all 3 pups while Shadow was forced to watch, unable to defend her babies against the superior wolf. Shadow knew what it meant to lose everything. Shadow understood abandonment, helplessness, and grief, and somehow when she found this orphaned bear cub crying for its dead mother, she couldn't walk away. "She's not just rescuing the cub," Elena said softly into her recorder. "She's rescuing herself. She's being the protector she wishes she'd been for her own pups." But what Elena didn't know yet was that Shadow's choice would force her into conflict with her entire pack, test her loyalty against her compassion, and require her to make a sacrifice that would either kill her or transform her into something the wolf world had never seen, a mother who chose love over survival. Shadow took the bear cub to an abandoned fox den, nearly 2 miles from her pack's territory. Elena and her team tracked her movements through GPS collar data, watching in real time as Shadow established what could only be described as a secret sanctuary for the cub she'd named, through her actions as family trail cameras positioned near the den captured footage that rewrote everything researchers understood about wolf behavior. Shadow was hunting constantly, bringing back small prey, rabbits, ground squirrels, and regurgitating partially digested meat for the cub, exactly as she would feed wolf pups. The bear cub, desperate and starving, ate eagerly, its survival instincts overriding any species-appropriate disgust. "She's keeping it alive," Dr. Marcus Webb observed, reviewing the footage with Elena. "But Elena, that cub needs more than Shadow can provide. Bear cubs nurse for months. They need specific nutrition, temperature regulation, long-term protection. Shadow's buying time, but without intervention, that cub dies within weeks. If we intervene, we separate them," Elena countered. "Shadow has bonded. That cub is the first thing she's been allowed to protect since her own pups were killed. Taking it away traumatizes them both. Leaving them together is impossible," Marcus argued. "Shadow's pack will eventually discover the cub. And when they do, he didn't need to finish." They both knew what happened when wolf packs found bear cubs, but Shadow was already dealing with the consequences of her choice. The GPS data showed her pack had begun searching for her, confused by her absence and unusual movement patterns. The alpha female, a dominant wolf named Frost, had been tracking Shadow's scent trail, and she was getting closer to the hidden den. On day 5 of Shadow's guardianship, the confrontation Elena had been dreading occurred. Trail camera 31 captured Frost discovering Shadow's den, and what happened next was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Frost approached aggressively, clearly intending to reassert dominance over the Omega wolf, who dared to separate from the pack. But when Frost detected the bear cub's scent, her aggression transformed into something more dangerous: pack protection instinct. Frost howled, calling the pack to eliminate what she perceived as a threat. Shadow's response was immediate and suicidal. She positioned herself at the den entrance, blocking access to the cub, and did something Omega wolves never did. She challenged the alpha. Shadow snarled, snapped, displayed aggression toward a wolf who outweighed her, outranked her, and had the entire pack's support. It was wolf suicide. Omegas who challenged alphas were killed or driven from the pack to die alone. But Shadow didn't back down. When Frost lunged, Shadow fought back with desperate ferocity, and the sounds of the fight brought the rest of the pack running. Elena watched the live GPS feed with horror as 6 wolves converged on Shadow's location. "Oh God, they're going to kill her. They're going to kill Shadow and the cub both." The field team was 30 minutes away, too far to intervene. Elena could only watch helplessly as the tracking data showed all 7 wolves in violent confrontation at the den site. Then something unexpected happened. The GPS signals scattered. The wolves were retreating, all except 2, Shadow and one other wolf, a mid-ranking male the team had named Storm. "What just happened?" Marcus demanded, trying to interpret the data. "Did Shadow drive them off?" "That's impossible." But when the field team finally arrived, they found something that explained the impossible. Storm was standing beside Shadow at the den entrance, both wolves bloodied but alive. And inside the den, unharmed and protected, was the bear cub. "Storm defended her," Elena breathed, examining the evidence. When the pack attacked Shadow for protecting the cub, Storm chose Shadow's side. He helped her fight off the entire pack. But why? Why would a mid-ranking wolf risk everything to defend an Omega and a bear cub? The answer came when Elena reviewed Storm's history and felt tears spring to her eyes. Storm was Shadow's brother from an earlier litter. He'd watched the alpha female kill Shadow's pups 2 years ago, had been powerless to stop it. When Shadow chose to protect this orphaned cub, Storm chose to protect his sister. And together they'd done the impossible. They'd driven their own pack away to save a baby bear. But the pack would return, and next time there would be no mercy. Shadow and Storm had become outcasts, rejected by their pack for the unforgivable sin of protecting a rival species. The GPS data showed them establishing a new territory around the den, working together to hunt, defend, and care for the growing bear cub, who was gaining strength daily under their unlikely protection. Elena's team began providing supplemental support, leaving high-protein food sources near the den site, ensuring the cub received proper nutrition while allowing Shadow and Storm to maintain their guardian roles. It was an unprecedented collaboration between humans and wolves to raise a grizzly bear. The cub is thriving, Elena documented 3 weeks into the arrangement. Weight gain is excellent. Behavior is normal for a juvenile grizzly. But there's something else happening that's remarkable. The cub is learning from wolves. The trail cameras captured the young bear, whom Elena had named Hope, mimicking wolf behaviors. Hope followed Shadow and Storm on hunting expeditions, watched them stalk prey, learned pack coordination that bears typically never exhibited. She was becoming something hybrid, a bear raised by wolves, exhibiting behaviors from both species. But at 8 weeks old, Hope was growing fast, and the dynamics were shifting. She was already 30 pounds, would eventually weigh 400. The question everyone was avoiding finally surfaced during a team meeting. What happens when Hope reaches adolescence? Marcus asked. When she's big enough that Shadow and Storm can't control her? When her bear instincts fully emerge and she sees them as competitors, not parents. We separate them before that happens, another researcher suggested. Take Hope to rehabilitation, prepare her for proper release. But Eleanor was shaking her head, watching new footage that changed everything. Look at this. Just captured this morning, the video showed Hope cornered by a mountain lion, an adult male easily capable of killing a juvenile bear. Shadow and Storm had been hunting nearby when they heard Hope's distress calls. They arrived within seconds, and what happened next demonstrated why their bond was so extraordinary. Shadow and Storm fought the mountain lion with coordinated pack tactics, but this time, Hope didn't cower. The young bear, learning from her wolf guardians, joined the fight. She used her growing size and emerging strength, alongside Shadow and Storm's speed and coordination. Together, 2 wolves and a bear, they drove off the mountain lion. A predator coalition that shouldn't exist had just defended themselves as a family. After the fight, Hope didn't return to the den alone. She stayed close to Shadow, nuzzling the wolf who'd saved her life twice now, making soft comfort sounds. Shadow responded with gentle licking, checking Hope for injuries, providing reassurance. They're not just guardian and dependent anymore, Elena said softly. They're family. Hope recognizes Shadow and Storm as her pack, and they treat her as a pack member. We're not looking at temporary adoption. We're looking at permanent interspecies integration. But the integration would be tested in ways no one anticipated, because Frost and the Lamar Canyon pack hadn't forgotten about the Omega wolf who'd defied them. And they were planning something that would force Shadow to choose between her birth family and the family she'd chosen. Trail camera 19 captured Frost and 4 pack members systematically marking territory, moving methodically towards Shadow's den. They weren't hunting. They were preparing for war. The pack was coming to eliminate the bear cub and punish the wolves who'd betrayed them, and this time they weren't taking chances. They'd brought overwhelming numbers, and they were moving with coordinated purpose that suggested premeditation, planning, vengeance. Elena watched the GPS data with growing dread as the pack closed in. Shadow, Storm, and Hope are outnumbered 5-3. Even with Storm's help, even with Hope's size, they can't win against the full pack. We have to intervene, but the field team was an hour away and the pack would arrive in minutes. Elena could only watch helplessly as the GPS signals converged on Shadow's den, as years of research and documentation came down to one question. Would Shadow surrender the cub to save herself? Or would she fight a battle she couldn't win to protect the baby she'd chosen over everything else? Trail camera 31 captured the confrontation that would become one of the most studied wildlife videos in history. Frost led the pack into the clearing where Shadow, Storm, and Hope had been resting. 5 wolves against 2 wolves and a juvenile bear. The odds were brutally clear. Frost approached with the authority of an alpha, her body language demanding submission. Shadow should have rolled onto her back, exposed her belly, shown subordination. Instead, Shadow stood, positioned herself between the pack and Hope, and held her ground. Storm moved beside his sister, forming a united front. And Hope, 3-month-old Hope, still learning what it meant to be a bear, stood between both wolves, refusing to flee, somehow understanding that running meant abandoning her family. Frost's message was clear through her aggressive posture: surrender the bear and be allowed back into the pack, or die defending it. Shadow's response was equally clear. She showed her teeth, planted her feet, and made a sound that even through the camera's limited audio was recognizable as defiance. The pack lunged as one coordinated unit. What followed was chaos, snarling, snapping, 2 wolves trying to defend against 5 while protecting a bear cub who shouldn't have been worth dying for. Shadow took the worst of it. Multiple wolves targeting the Omega, who dared to challenge hierarchy. Storm fought to protect his sister, taking wounds meant for her, and Hope, despite her youth, used her growing strength to knock attacking wolves away, her bear power already formidable even in a juvenile. Elena watched the GPS data with tears streaming, knowing she was witnessing wolves dying for a choice that made no biological sense. Shadow should surrender. Storm should abandon her. Hope should flee while the wolves fought. None of them did. For 7 brutal minutes, Shadow's chosen family held their ground. Shadow was bleeding from multiple wounds. Storm's leg was injured. Hope was terrified but refused to run. They were losing, being overwhelmed by superior numbers, moments from death. Then something happened that shocked everyone. A howl echoed across the valley, not from Frost's pack but from the ridge above. 3 wolves appeared, silhouetted against the sky. Dispersers, lone wolves with no pack, drawn by the sounds of confrontation. Dispersers typically avoided pack conflicts, but these 3 did something unprecedented. They charged down the ridge and entered the fight, on Shadow's side. They attacked Frost's pack members, evening the odds, transforming the fight from execution to genuine battle. Elena had no explanation for why 3 strange wolves would help an Omega, her brother, and a bear cub against an established pack. But as she watched the GPS data, she realized something remarkable. 2 of the 3 dispersers were showing movement patterns consistent with wolves who'd been driven from their own packs for refusing to abandon weak or injured. Packmates, they're rebels, Elena breathed. Wolves who've been punished for showing compassion, for refusing to follow the pack's cruelty. They saw Shadow protecting Hope, saw her choosing loyalty over hierarchy, and they recognized something in her. They're defending her because she represents what they believe in. The battle turned. Frost's pack, facing 8 opponents instead of 3, made the calculation all predators make. This fight wasn't worth the cost. They retreated, bloodied and defeated, leaving Shadow's territory. The 3 disperser wolves didn't leave. They approached Shadow cautiously, showed submission, and through their body language made an offer that Elena couldn't quite believe she was interpreting correctly. They wanted to join her. 3 outcasts offering to form a new pack with an Omega wolf. Her brother and a bear cub as the reason for their loyalty. Shadow, exhausted and wounded, touched noses with each disperser in turn, the wolf greeting that meant acceptance, family, pack. Then she led all of them to the den where Hope waited. And together, 5 wolves and 1 bear, they fought. Over the following months, Shadow's pack, which researchers began calling the Sanctuary Pack, established themselves as a legitimate force in Yellowstone's complex wolf dynamics. The 5 wolves hunted cooperatively, shared kills equally, regardless of rank, and protected Hope with unified devotion as she grew from a vulnerable cub into a formidable juvenile bear. But Hope's growth created new complications. At 6 months old, she weighed nearly 100 pounds and was developing the territorial instincts natural to adolescent bears. She should have been pushing boundaries, challenging her guardians, preparing to disperse. Instead, she remained fiercely loyal to her wolf family, learning to hunt alongside them, participating in pack activities, behaving more like a massive wolf than a bear. She's culturally a wolf, Dr. Marcus observed, watching footage of Hope joining a coordinated elk hunt. She uses pack tactics, responds to wolf vocalizations, maintains pack hierarchy. Biologically, she's a grizzly, but behaviorally, she's been completely socialized as a wolf, the other packs noticed. Yellowstone's established wolf packs began treating Shadow's group as a genuine threat, not just because of their numbers, but because Hope gave them a tactical advantage no other pack possessed. A bear fighting alongside wolves created a combat dynamic that traditional packs couldn't counter. But the most significant change came when Shadow did something that shocked even Elena. The wolf went into heat, and one of the disperser males, a wolf the team had named River, became her mate. After 2 years of being denied breeding rights by her original pack, Shadow was finally being allowed to fulfill her biological drive to be a mother. If Shadow has pups, Elena told her team, we're going to see something unprecedented. Wolf pups raised alongside a juvenile bear. The socialization implications are extraordinary, but Shadow's pregnancy brought unexpected danger. Frost's pack, still hostile and resentful, detected Shadow's vulnerable state and saw an opportunity for revenge. The GPS data showed them moving systematically toward the Sanctuary Pack's territory, and this time they'd recruited wolves from a neighboring pack. 10 wolves were coming for Shadow. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and even with her pack's protection and Hope's growing strength, the odds were impossible. Elena mobilized every resource, rangers, wildlife teams, even considering tranquilizer intervention to prevent the slaughter. But before any human help could arrive, Hope did something that proved just how deeply she'd integrated into wolf society. The young bear, now 9 months old and nearly 200 pounds, detected the approaching threat before the wolves did. She positioned herself at the territory boundary and did something that trail cameras captured in stunning footage. She roared, not a cub's cry, but a full adult warning roar that carried across the valley, announcing her presence and her protection of this territory. The approaching wolves heard that roar and hesitated. They'd been expecting to fight wolves. They hadn't anticipated fighting a bear who'd learned wolf tactics and had wolf pack support. Hope stood her ground, and Shadow's pack formed up behind. Her not around her for protection, but behind her as backup. Hope was taking point. The bear was defending the wolves. Frost's coalition approached cautiously, reassessing their strategy. 10 wolves could overwhelm 5 wolves and 1 bear, yes, but the cost would be catastrophic. Hope was large enough now to kill or severely injure multiple attackers, and the Sanctuary Pack would fight with desperate unity. The standoff lasted an hour. Finally, Frost made a decision that changed everything. She approached alone, leaving her coalition behind, and stopped 30 feet from Hope. The alpha wolf and the juvenile bear stared at each other, and something passed between them that Elena couldn't quite interpret through camera footage. Then Frost did something that made Elena gasp. The alpha wolf lowered her head in a gesture that looked almost like respect, recognition, acknowledgement that Shadow's pack was legitimate, that Hope was a true member, that this territory belonged to them by right of their willingness to die for each other. Frost retreated, taking her coalition with her, and the GPS data showed them leaving the area entirely. The war was over, not through violence, but through Frost's acceptance that some bonds were stronger than hierarchy, that some families were chosen rather than born. Shadow, still pregnant and vulnerable, approached Hope and nuzzled the young bear who defended her. Hope responded with gentle sounds, careful not to hurt her wolf mother with her growing strength. "They're not alpha and subordinate," Elena said, documenting the moment. "They're mother and daughter. Species doesn't matter. Hope would die for Shadow and Shadow would die for Hope. That's family." In late April, Shadow gave birth to 4 pups in a den carefully selected by the entire pack. River stood guard outside, while Storm and the other pack members maintained vigilance, but the most remarkable guardian was Hope. The now 1-year-old bear, weighing over 250 pounds, positioned herself at the den entrance and refused to move for 3 days straight, protecting her wolf mother during her most vulnerable time. Elena's team watched through cameras as Hope transitioned from protected child to protective sibling. When Shadow emerged with her 4 tiny pups, 2 males, 2 females, Hope's behavior was breathtakingly gentle. She sniffed each pup carefully, made soft sounds that seemed to be attempts at wolf vocalizations, and allowed the babies to crawl on her massive paws while Shadow rested. "The pups are being raised by an entire pack that includes a grizzly bear as a full member," Dr. Marcus documented. "They're imprinting on Hope as normal, as family. We're creating a generation of wolves who will grow up believing that bears can be pack members." But raising 4 pups required enormous resources, and the sanctuary pack's hunting territory was stretched thin. They needed to expand, which meant potential conflict with neighboring packs who were already wary of the bear-wolf coalition. That's when Hope made a decision that proved she'd learned more from her wolf family than anyone realized. The young bear began hunting alone, taking down elk and deer that were too large for the wolf pack to handle efficiently, then bringing her kills back to share. She was providing for her family using her bear strength, while honoring the wolf principle of communal resources. "She's not just part of the pack," Elena said, reviewing footage of Hope dragging a massive elk carcass to the den where Shadow's pups waited. "She's become their primary provider. She's supporting wolf pups with bear hunting capability. This is mutualism between species at a level we've never documented. The pups thrived under the combined care of wolves and bear. By 6 weeks old, they were playing with Hope, climbing on her, treating her enormous size as a playground. Hope tolerated this with remarkable patience, careful never to hurt them with her strength, responding to their tiny nips and paw swats as if they could actually harm her. But the idyllic family structure faced its greatest test when tragedy struck in late May. River, Shadow's mate and the pup's father, was killed by a mountain lion while hunting alone. The entire pack grieved, but Shadow's devastation was profound. She'd finally found a mate, finally had pups that were allowed to live, and now she'd lost her partner. Hope's response to Shadow's grief revealed the depth of their bond. The bear stayed close to Shadow constantly, provided food so the grieving wolf didn't have to hunt, and even helped care for the pups when Shadow was too overwhelmed to function. Hope had been saved by Shadow's maternal instinct, and the wildfire reached the sanctuary pack's territory with terrifying speed, flames consuming everything in its path, smoke turning day into choking darkness. Elena and her team watched, helplessly from evacuation zones, as GPS collars transmitted the pack's positions, all moving away from the fire, except 2 signals that remained stationary. At the den site, Shadow and Hope had stayed with the pups. "They can't survive this," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "The fire will reach the den in less than an hour. Even if they run now with the pups, they won't make it." "Elena, they're going to die." But what the cameras captured in those final moments before the smoke obscured everything would become the most viewed wildlife footage in history, a testament to love that defied species and survival instinct itself. Hope positioned herself at the den entrance and began digging, not to escape, but to expand the den to create a larger refuge. Her massive bear strength moved earth that wolves never could, excavating deeper, wider, creating a chamber that might, just might, provide enough protection from the fire's heat and smoke. Shadow carried her pups one by one into Hope's expanded chamber, while Hope continued digging, her paws bloody, her breath labored from smoke inhalation, refusing to stop until the shelter was complete. Then Hope did something that made every researcher watching break down, sobbing. The bear positioned her massive body across the den entrance, blocking it completely with her bulk, creating a living barrier between the fire and the wolf family inside. She was going to absorb the fire's heat with her own body, shield them with her flesh, so they could live. Shadow emerged from the den and tried to pull Hope inside, tried to make her take shelter, but Hope refused. She gently pushed Shadow back toward her pups with her massive head, made a sound that needed no translation. "Protect them. I'll protect you," and sealed herself outside as the wall between fire and family. The GPS signals went dark as the fire engulfed the area. For 6 hours, Elena's team had no data, no confirmation of survival, only smoke and flames and the terrible certainty that they just witnessed the death of the most remarkable interspecies bond ever documented. When the fire finally passed and emergency teams could access the area, they found devastation. Thousands of acres of forest reduced to ash, wildlife casualties in the hundreds, landscape transformed into a blackened wasteland. They found the den site, scorched earth, still smoking, trees around it completely consumed, and they found Hope, collapsed across the den entrance. Her fur singed, her body motionless, having given everything to be the shield she'd promised to be. Inside the den, they found Shadow and all 4 pups alive, protected by the expanded chamber Hope had dug, and the body she'd used as a barrier. They were smoke-affected but breathing, surviving because a bear had chosen to die for wolves. But Hope wasn't dead. Unconscious, severely burned, barely breathing, but alive. Her thick fur and fat layers had provided just enough insulation. Her massive size had absorbed just enough heat, and her will to protect her family had kept her breathing through conditions that should have killed her. The emergency team worked frantically, providing oxygen, treating burns, stabilizing Hope for transport to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Shadow refused to leave Hope's side, and when they tried to separate them, the wolf's distress was so profound, they finally allowed Shadow and her pups to travel with Hope in the same transport vehicle. Hope spent 6 weeks in intensive care, her recovery uncertain, her survival against odds. Shadow stayed in an adjacent enclosure, refusing food until the rehabilitation staff finally allowed brief supervised visits. The moment Shadow could see Hope, the wolf's appetite returned, as if she needed confirmation her protector lived to have reason to keep living herself. Hope survived. Against predictions, against statistics, against the devastating injuries she'd sustained, the young bear who'd been saved by a wolf fought her way back to life, perhaps because she knew a wolf mother and 4 pups needed her to come home. 3 months after the fire, Hope was released back to Yellowstone, her burns healed, but her fur showing permanent scars from her sacrifice. Shadow and her pups were released simultaneously, and the reunion was captured on every camera the research team possessed. Hope and Shadow touched noses in the greeting that meant family, and Shadow's 4 pups, now 4 months old, strong and thriving, climbed all over the bear who'd saved their lives before they'd even understood what life was. The sanctuary pack reformed immediately, with Storm and the other members appearing within hours, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. But the story didn't end with reunion. Over the following years, Hope became a legend in Yellowstone, the bear who lived with wolves, who hunted for her pack, who'd nearly died protecting them. She never left Shadow's pack, never sought out other bears, never showed interest in establishing her own territory. When Shadow's pups matured and dispersed to form their own packs, they carried with them the knowledge that bears could be family, that species boundaries were not absolute, that protection and loyalty mattered more than genetics. 3 of Shadow's pups eventually formed their own packs, and remarkably, 2 of them accepted lone juvenile bears into their groups, continuing the tradition their mother and Hope had started. We're not just documenting one unusual relationship anymore. Eleanor explained in the award-winning documentary that chronicled Shadow and Hope's story. We're watching the birth of cultural evolution in real time. Shadow's descendants are creating a new understanding of what pack means, of who can be family, of what's possible when compassion overrides instinct. Shadow lived to be 9 years old, a long life for a wild wolf. When she died peacefully in her sleep, Hope was beside her as she'd been for 7 years.